My dearest ones, I'm writing this letter with trembling hands, not from age, but from the weight of everything I've carried in my heart. At 73, I thought I knew what love looked like, what family meant. I thought kindness was always rewarded with kindness. How wrong I was. It began 2 years ago when my son Michael called me, his voice thick with worry and desperation. "Mom, we're losing the house. The business failed completely, and Sarah's been laid off for 3 months now. The kids, they need stability. They need a roof over their heads." My heart broke for them immediately. Without hesitation, I opened my doors. "Come home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All of you, stay as long as you need." I had been living alone in this 4-bedroom house since your grandfather passed 5 years ago. The silence had become my constant companion, but I convinced myself that having family around would bring joy back into these walls. I prepared bedrooms for my granddaughter Emma, 8, and grandson Tyler, 5. I spent days scrubbing floors, washing linens, and making sure everything was perfect. I stocked the pantry with all their favorite foods, bought new towels in colors I thought they'd like, and even repainted the guest bathroom a cheerful yellow because I remembered Sarah mentioning she loved sunny colors. When they arrived with their moving truck on a crisp September morning, I stood on the porch wearing my best dress and my brightest smile. "Welcome home," I whispered as I hugged each of them. Emma clung to my neck, and Tyler's little hand found mine. For a moment, everything felt right with the world. The house felt alive again. The first few months were everything I had dreamed of and more. We shared dinners around my old oak table, the same one where Michael had done his homework 30 years ago. The scratches and stains told stories of birthday parties, holiday meals, and countless family moments. I helped Emma with her reading every evening, watching her confidence grow with each page. Tyler would curl up in my lap while I told stories about his father's childhood, his eyes wide with wonder at tales of his daddy as a little boy. Sarah seemed genuinely grateful, always thanking me for my help and telling me how much she appreciated having a safe place for her family. Michael appeared relieved to have the pressure lifted from his shoulders, the worry lines around his eyes beginning to fade. We established routines that felt natural and warm. I'd wake early to make coffee and breakfast, humming old songs while the house slowly came to life around me. But slowly, subtly, like the changing of seasons, things began to shift. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as natural adjustments. I'd make breakfast for everyone, setting the table with care and preparing different options to suit each person's preferences. But they'd eat while scrolling their phones, barely acknowledging my efforts. When I'd try to join conversations about their day, their plans, their struggles, they'd speak over me or change the subject to something I couldn't relate to. My suggestions about family activities were dismissed with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "That's a nice idea, Mom," Michael would say, "but we're pretty busy with other things." When I offered advice about job hunting, having worked for 40 years myself, or budgeting, having managed a household through lean times, I was met with patient sighs. "Mom, you don't understand how things work now," Michael would say, his tone patronizing in a way that made my chest tighten. "Times have changed. The job market is different. Technology is different. Everything is different." I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, watching life happen around me, but not being part of it. They rearranged my furniture without asking, claiming it was more functional or better for the kids. My favorite reading chair, the one where I'd nursed Michael as a baby and later read him bedtime stories, was moved to the basement because it didn't match the aesthetic of their modern lifestyle. My collection of family photos on the mantel, pictures spanning decades of birthdays, graduations, and holidays, was replaced with their sleek art prints and minimalist decorations. When I gently asked about it, Sarah explained that they were decluttering and creating a more contemporary space. The photos of my parents, my wedding day, Michael's first steps, were tucked away in boxes like relics of a life that no longer mattered. The kitchen, once my domain where I'd created meals with love and care, became their territory. Sarah would cook elaborate dinners that I couldn't eat because of my dietary restrictions, then act annoyed when I'd quietly prepare something simple for myself. "You're so high maintenance, Mom," she'd sigh, as if my need for low-sodium foods was a personal attack on her culinary skills. I started eating alone more often, retreating to my bedroom with a sandwich and a book. The house filled with their laughter, their music, their friends, their lives, while I became increasingly invisible. When my longtime friends called, I'd pretend everything was wonderful. "Oh, it's so nice having family around," I'd lie, forcing cheer into my voice while my heart ached with loneliness. The grandchildren, once eager for my attention and stories, began to pull away. Emma would roll her eyes when I offered to help with homework. "Mom says you don't know the new way they teach math," she'd say, not unkindly, but with the casual cruelty of childhood honesty. Tyler stopped asking for bedtime stories, preferring his iPad to my voice, his small fingers swiping through colorful games instead of turning pages in the books I'd saved from his father's childhood. I watched from the sidelines as they created a life within my home that had no space for me. They made decisions about groceries, utilities, and household rules without consulting me. My input was neither sought nor valued. I became a guest in my own house, expected to be grateful for the company while simultaneously staying out of the way. The isolation was suffocating. I'd sit in my room, listening to their conversations downstairs, feeling like I was eavesdropping on strangers. They'd discuss plans for weekends, vacations, and activities as if I wasn't there. When I'd tentatively suggest joining them for a movie or a trip to the park, I'd be met with vague responses or outright dismissal. "Mom, you wouldn't enjoy it," Sarah would say. "It's going to be loud and crowded." "We'll be out pretty late," Michael would add. "You need your rest." My social life withered. Friends stopped calling as often because I kept declining invitations, too embarrassed to admit that I felt unwelcome in my own home. I missed book club meetings, church socials, and coffee dates because I was always trying to be available for my family, hoping they'd include me in their plans. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. The air outside was crisp with the promise of winter, and I had been feeling particularly lonely. The house felt cold despite the heating, and I realized it was the coldness of indifference that chilled me most. I had been thinking about the old days, when our house was filled with warmth and laughter, when everyone felt welcome and valued. I decided to suggest a family game night, something we used to do when Michael was young. I remembered how we'd gather around the dining room table, playing Monopoly or Scrabble until late into the night, sharing stories and jokes. Those evenings had been some of my happiest memories as a mother. I knocked softly on the living room door, where they were all gathered watching a movie. The blue glow of the television illuminated their faces, and I felt like I was interrupting something sacred. "I thought maybe we could play some board games after dinner tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice bright and enthusiastic. "I found that old Monopoly set in the closet, and there's also Scrabble and—" "Mom, seriously?" Michael interrupted, not even looking away from the screen. His voice carried an edge of annoyance that made me flinch. "We're not kids anymore. We don't need you to entertain us." "I just thought it might be fun for Emma and Tyler," I persisted, my voice growing smaller with each word. "They might enjoy learning some classic games." Sarah let out an exasperated sigh, the kind you make when dealing with something tedious. "They have their own activities, Mom. They don't need old-fashioned games. They have video games and tablets." "But we're family," I said, the words coming out more desperately than I intended. "I just want to spend time together. Real time, where we talk and laugh and—" "Mom, stop!" Michael said, finally turning to look at me. What I saw in his eyes broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was pity mixed with annoyance, the look you give someone who just doesn't get it, who doesn't understand that their time has passed. "You need to understand something," he said, his voice carrying a cold edge I'd never heard before. "We're grateful for what you've done, letting us stay here. But you can't expect us to revolve our lives around you. You can't expect us to pretend like we're still a traditional family playing board games and singing songs. That's not who we are anymore." He paused, and I could see him searching for words that would finally make me understand my place in this new dynamic. You're just dead weight now." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Dead weight. In my own house. From the son I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. The son I had stayed up with through countless nights when he was sick. The son I had worked 2 jobs to put through college. The son I had celebrated every achievement with and comforted through every disappointment. I stood there in the doorway, my mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The room fell silent except for the sound of the television, some comedy show with a laugh track that seemed to mock my pain. Even the children seemed to sense that something terrible had happened. Emma was looking at her father with wide, confused eyes, while Tyler had gone very still on the couch, his small body tense with the awareness that something was wrong. Sarah looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. She shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between Michael and me, but no words of defense came. No one said anything to soften the blow or take back the cruel words. I nodded slowly, as if I understood, as if this revelation made perfect sense. Then I turned and walked back to my bedroom, my legs feeling like they might give out with each step. I managed to close the door behind me before the tears came. Dead weight. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I'd shared with my husband for 45 years, and wept quietly. I muffled my sobs with a pillow so they wouldn't hear, so I wouldn't burden them with my pain. How had I become a burden? When had my love become an inconvenience? When had my very presence become something to be endured rather than enjoyed? I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made as a mother, all the dreams I'd deferred to make sure Michael had everything he needed. I remembered working double shifts as a nurse so he could have new school clothes, going without so he could have piano lessons, staying up all night when he was sick, celebrating his achievements as if they were my own. I thought about your grandfather, how he used to tell me I was the heart of our family. "You make everyone feel loved, Dorothy," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with affection. "That's your gift to the world." Now that gift felt like a curse, an unwanted offering that nobody wanted to receive. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every interaction from the past months, seeing clearly for the first time how I'd been slowly erased from my own life. I had become a shadow in my own home, tiptoeing around their schedules, their preferences, their needs, while my own had become irrelevant. I remembered the woman I used to be before I became just Mom, and then Grandma. I had been Dorothy, a skilled nurse who had saved lives and comforted the dying. I had been a woman who organized charity drives and baked pies for church socials. I had been someone who mattered, whose opinions were valued, whose presence was welcomed. But as the sun rose, painting my bedroom in soft golden light, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was your grandfather's voice echoing in my memory, or maybe it was just the stubborn streak that had carried me through 73 years of life's ups and downs. I realized that I still had choices. I still had power. This was still my house, my life, my story to write. I got up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had been broken but was not defeated. I saw someone who had forgotten her own worth but could remember it again. I saw my mother's determined eyes and my father's strong jawline. I saw generations of women who had survived and thrived despite hardship. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a kind man named Robert, who had handled my husband's estate and various legal matters over the years. "Dorothy, it's good to hear from you," he said warmly. "How are you adjusting to having family in the house?" "That's actually what I'm calling about," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I need to make some changes." "Dorothy, are you sure about this?" he asked when I explained what I wanted to do. "It's a significant step. Have you thought about the implications?" "I've thought about nothing else," I said. "It's time I remembered who I am." I spent the next few days quietly making arrangements, moving through the house like a ghost, invisible to my family but busy with purpose. I researched assisted living communities, not because I needed assistance, but because I wanted to be around people who valued companionship and conversation. I wanted to be somewhere that my stories mattered, where my experience was seen as wisdom rather than irrelevance. I found a lovely place called Sunset Gardens, where residents had their own apartments but shared common areas for meals and activities. The brochure showed people my age laughing together, playing cards, tending to gardens, participating in book clubs and art classes. It looked like the kind of place where being 73 wasn't a disability, but simply another chapter in a rich, full life. I visited on a Thursday afternoon, telling Michael and Sarah I was going to the doctor. The director, a warm woman named Linda, gave me a tour of the facilities. I watched residents engaged in various activities, some painting watercolors, others playing piano. A group engaged in what looked like a lively political discussion over coffee. Our residents are very active, Linda explained. We believe in living fully at every stage of life. Age is just a number here. I fell in love with the place immediately. The staff was warm and respectful, treating the residents like valued individuals rather than burdens to be managed. I watched an elderly man helping a woman navigate her walker, both of them laughing about something. I saw a group of women my age planning what looked like a party, their faces animated with excitement. I'd like to reserve a one-bedroom apartment, I told Linda. I'll need to move in within the month. We'd be delighted to have you, she said. You seem like someone who would fit right in here. I also called my old friend Margaret, who had been widowed the year before and was struggling with loneliness in her own large, empty house. I'm making some changes, I told her. Would you like to go on that cruise we talked about last year? My treat. Dorothy, that sounds wonderful, she said, her voice brightening. But are you sure? That's a significant expense. I'm more sure than I've been about anything in years, I replied. We've earned some adventure. Meanwhile, at home, I began to reclaim small pieces of myself. I moved my reading chair back upstairs, positioning it by the window where I could watch the birds in the garden. I put my family photos back on the mantel, not all of them, but the ones that brought me joy rather than pain. I cooked the foods I enjoyed, regardless of whether anyone else ate them. Michael and Sarah seemed to sense a change in me, but couldn't quite identify what was different. I was polite but distant, helpful but not eager to please. I stopped trying to insert myself into their conversations and activities. Instead, I focused on myself for the first time in years. I started reading again, devouring books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I called old friends and reestablished connections that had been neglected. I even started taking walks around the neighborhood, something I'd stopped doing because I'd always felt like I needed to be available for my family. 2 weeks after that terrible night, I sat them down for a family meeting. They gathered in the living room with obvious reluctance, probably expecting me to apologize or try to ingratiate myself again. I have something important to tell you, I began, my voice calm and clear. I've decided to sell the house. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the sound of children playing in the distance. What? Sarah was the first to speak, her voice sharp with disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said, meeting her eyes steadily. I've already spoken with a realtor. The house will be on the market within the month. Mom, you can't do this, Michael said, his face pale with shock. Where will we live? We can't afford our own place yet. That's something you'll need to figure out, I said, gently but firmly. I'm moving to a senior community where I'll be appreciated and valued for who I am, not just tolerated as a burden. But we can't afford our own place yet, Sarah protested, her voice rising with panic. The job market is still tough, and with the kids' school expenses. I understand your situation, I interrupted, my voice remaining steady despite the turmoil in my chest. Which is why I'm giving you 60 days' notice. That should be enough time to find something suitable. Emma and Tyler were looking back and forth between the adults, sensing the tension but not understanding the full implications of what was happening. My heart ached for them, but I knew this was the right thing to do for all of us. Mom, I'm sorry about what I said the other night, Michael said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I hadn't heard since he was a child. I was stressed and tired and worried about our future. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did, I said quietly, without malice. And that's okay. Sometimes we need to hear hard truths to make necessary changes. You're being ridiculous, Sarah snapped, her composure finally cracking. You're going to throw away your family over a few careless words? What kind of person does that? I'm not throwing away my family, I replied, my voice growing stronger. I'm choosing to value myself the way I deserve to be valued. If that seems ridiculous to you, then perhaps that's part of the problem. The argument that followed was painful but necessary. They accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and cruel. They tried guilt, telling me how disappointed my husband would be. They tried anger, raising their voices and making demands. They tried manipulation, using the children as leverage. But I held firm. I had found my strength again, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. I was done being invisible, done being dead weight, done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. "I've lived in this house for 45 years, I said when they finally paused for breath. "I've raised children here, buried my husband from here, and created a lifetime of memories within these walls. But it's just a house without love and respect, and I deserve both." The next month passed in a blur of activity. I sorted through decades of belongings, keeping only what brought me joy or held precious memories. I donated clothes to charity, books to the library, and household items to neighbors who would appreciate them. It was liberating to let go of the accumulation of years, to realize how little I actually needed to be happy. The hardest part was dealing with the family photos and mementos. I kept the ones that held happy memories, pictures of birthdays and holidays, letters from friends, small treasures that reminded me of joyful times. I quietly disposed of the rest, not out of spite, but because I was choosing to focus on light rather than shadow. Margaret helped me pack, and we laughed more than we had in years. "I'm proud of you, Dorothy," she said as we wrapped dishes in newspaper. "It takes real courage to start over at our age." "I'm not starting over," I corrected her, feeling the truth of the words as I spoke them. "I'm starting again. There's a difference." Michael and Sarah found an apartment across town, and despite everything, I helped them with the security deposit. I wasn't trying to punish them or make their lives harder. I loved them, but I had learned the hard way that love doesn't require self-sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. The day they moved out was emotional for everyone. Emma hugged me tightly, her young face confused by the changes happening around her. Tyler asked if he could still visit me at my new place, and I assured him that he could, that I would always be his grandma, no matter where I lived. Michael looked like he wanted to say something as he loaded the last box into his truck, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. Sarah barely looked at me, her jaw set with anger and hurt. I understood. The hurt was still too fresh for all of us, the wounds too new to have healed. 3 days later, I moved into my new apartment at Sunset Gardens. It was smaller than my house, but perfectly suited to my needs. I had a kitchenette where I could prepare simple meals, a comfortable living area with space for my favorite chair and books, and a bedroom with a view of the carefully tended garden. My first night there, I sat by my window and watched the sun set over the flowers. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I wasn't invisible here. I wasn't a burden. I was Dorothy, a woman with stories to tell and wisdom to share, and that was enough. I joined the book club within my first week, signed up for the gardening committee, and started taking watercolor classes. I made friends with other residents who valued conversation and companionship. We shared meals, played cards, and supported each other through the inevitable challenges of aging. Margaret and I took our cruise 6 months later. We sailed through the Caribbean, watching dolphins play in our wake and sharing stories with fellow travelers. I felt more alive than I had in years, more like myself than I had since becoming a widow. "You're glowing," Margaret observed one evening as we watched the sunset from the ship's deck. "I'm free," I replied, feeling the truth of it in my bones. I had forgotten what that felt like. A year after I moved out, Michael called. His voice was different, softer, more humble, carrying the weight of reflection. "Mom, I've been thinking about what I said that night, about what I called you. I was wrong. I was so very wrong." "I know you were," I said gently. "But thank you for saying that." "I miss you," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "The kids miss you too. Emma asked me why Grandma doesn't live with us anymore, and I didn't know how to answer her." "What did you tell her?" "That Grandma needed her own space to be happy," he said, "and that maybe we hadn't been very good at making her feel welcome in our home." We talked for an hour, really talked, for the first time in years. He told me about his new job, about Emma's soccer games, about Tyler's fascination with dinosaurs. I shared stories about my new friends, my art classes, my small adventures. Would you like to come for dinner on Sunday? He asked before we hung up. I'll cook this time. Remember how you used to teach me to make your famous pot roast? I'd like that very much, I said, feeling something heal inside my chest. Our relationship now is different, but better. We see each other regularly, but I'm no longer the family caretaker or the invisible matriarch. I'm a grandmother who is valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Emma and Tyler visit me at Sunset Gardens, and they're fascinated by the community. They've made friends with other residents, and I love watching them bridge the generational gap with their natural curiosity and kindness. Sarah and I have reached a cordial understanding. We're polite to each other, and she's apologized for her part in making me feel unwelcome. Our relationship may never be warm, but it's respectful, and that's enough for now. I'm writing this letter because I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life. I wasted 2 years being invisible, trying to earn love that I already deserved. I let myself become dead weight in my own home, forgetting that I had built that home with my own hands and heart. But I also want you to know that forgiveness is possible. Michael's words hurt me deeply, but I've chosen to forgive him. Not because what he said was acceptable, but because carrying anger would only poison my newfound peace. I'm 74 now, and I'm having the time of my life. I'm taking Spanish lessons, planning another cruise with Margaret, and I've even joined the community theater group. I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead, surrounded by people who see me as a gift rather than a burden. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, please know that you have choices. You have value. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by your own family. And if they can't see your worth, then perhaps it's time to find people who can. Remember, my dear ones, you are never dead weight. You are the accumulation of decades of love, wisdom, and experience. You are the keeper of family stories, the source of hard-won knowledge, the living link to the past. You are valuable beyond measure. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, not even your own children. With all my love and hope for your happiness, Grandma Dorothy P.S. I'm hosting a tea party next Tuesday at Sunset Gardens. Mrs. Chen is bringing her famous cookies, and we're going to solve all the world's problems over Earl Grey and laughter. It's exactly the kind of afternoon I used to dream about. Life is good when you remember who you are,